Steve and I met in a small group at church in 1985. And the night I met him, I knew that he was the person that I wanted to spend the rest of my life with. It just took him a little longer to decide that about me. Um, he had such a zeal for life and an energy about him that was just really attractive to me, along with the fact that he loved God. And we dated and then we married. We had 3 children. And Steve was a great provider. He was a great father, and he was a great husband. He worked hard because we owned our own businesses, but he always found time for me and the kids, and he always made life an adventure for us.
Thinking back to my childhood, one of my favorite memories was how at night my dad would carry me upstairs to put me to bed.
I had the privilege of spending a lot of time with Steve the last 14 months of his life. A lot of our time was spent at the hospital and doctor's appointments and chemotherapy treatments and just different medical needs that came up.
I first met Steve when Andy and I ran the Mercedes Marathon together. Steve surprised us at the end, at the finish line, and he was there to take pictures of us and congratulate us, and he had some food for us. But I think that just really showed me at the beginning what a great guy he was, because the race was on a weekend, and so he had left the garden shop for the day and was there to support us, and that really meant a lot to me.
One thing I love about Dad is that he always included us in whatever he was doing, and so he owned his own small business, the garden shop. But he loved to work all the time. But we never felt like he neglected us, because he would always invite us and include us in whatever he was doing. And so whenever he was at the garden shop on a Saturday, that meant we were all at the garden shop on a Saturday.
I remember when I was a kid, my dad used to come tuck us in at night, and he used to give us a hug and tell us that he loved us and pray with us. And he was very consistent about that. And one of the things he did was, like when I was 5, he would give me 5 hugs. When I was 6, it was 6 hugs, and so on, until he wasn't tucking us in anymore. And one night he told me, when you're older, you're not going to want me to do this anymore. And I said, of course I am, Dad. I'll always want you to do that. You can always tell me you love me and give me a hug.
He was a people person. He was a people magnet. He just loved people. He was entertaining. He was positive. He loved serving others. Whenever anybody needed anything, you could always count on Steve to be there.
He found joy in every scenario that he found himself in. He just always found the good in every single situation.
When Steve was first diagnosed, Steve and Cindy came to live with us because we had a main floor bedroom. And I was pregnant last year when Steve was sick, and so we got to spend a lot of quality time on the couch watching Netflix together. And so I really got to know Steve pretty well over the last year.
My dad always tried to make things fun.
I remember when I was about 6 or 7, my dad put me in the Bobcat with him at the garden shop, and was teaching me how to move the controls and move the bucket and the lift. And one day he just told me to go get in it and move something, and I just thought, I'm not ready to do this, but I went and got in it, and he told me what to do step by step, and told me how to get everything maneuvered right. And then I remember when my 3rd grade teacher came in when I was in 3rd grade, and I was out in the Bobcat, and I just waved at her. I was probably like 8 years old, and he gave me the instructions that I need, and he told me how to do it, and then he trusted me to go off one day and do it by myself, and told me I didn't need him anymore, and that I knew how to do it on my own. So he was always very, very willing to put people in positions that they didn't feel like they were ready for, maybe believing in me when I didn't believe in myself, and making me put myself out there in those different situations and really grow as a person.
One thing I really appreciate Dad is that he taught us, when we were growing up, how to be men, but then especially the last 2 years of his life, he really taught us how to die well. And so what that meant for Dad was to really spend time with his family and to love them, to make growing closer to God a huge priority. And so Dad and would bring Andy and I to him and say, let's talk about prayer and what it means to talk to God and to be close to him. And so he spent a lot of time with Mom and really made their relationship a huge priority. And, you know, he didn't want to die at all, but he showed us what it meant to die well. And that was really aligning all the important priorities of his life so that we knew about his love for God, and we knew how much he loved Mom, and we really knew and felt how much he loved all of us.
Steve was the person who would make things happen.
I really liked going on trips with Dad, and even though road trips can be boring, he made them fun. Whenever we got a new CD or song that we didn't know, we would always play it over from the beginning and learn each line and then start it over and over again.
It was amazing to me when Steve and Cindy lived here, the different ways that I saw Steve be just such a strong person.
A year ago, Steve, Chris, and I traveled to MD Anderson in Houston to get a second opinion. During that trip, there was not one doctor or nurse that Steve came into contact with without, taking a selfie with them and just bringing so much, happiness and laughter to the situation. He brought a smile to everybody's faces that worked there. I remember just sitting in the waiting room. We were there for about 3 or 4 days, and Chris and I sat a lot in the waiting room, and we would be sitting there, and my phone would just be blowing up with pictures of Steve and all these medical professionals at MD Anderson. He just made it a point to make sure he knew every person's name that he came in contact with, and went as far as taking a picture with them and asking about them and their life and how they were doing. And so I just remember just that trip. It was a really profound moment for me, just the whole trip. Just seeing, my father-in-law, just have a terminal illness, and he just found joy in every single thing that he did. And
so one time I was probably 10 or 12 years old, and I had really gotten excited about Christianity and church and youth group. And so, of course, when you're in middle school, the big thing is to have like the church group T-shirt. And so I was wearing my T-shirt from the church group at the time, and Dad was in his Suburban. He was leaving, but what had happened that day is I wasn't being really nice at all to either Mom or Andy or Lauren, my brother and sister. And so Dad stopped me in the driveway, and he said, "Chris, come here." So I came up to he pulled down the window of the Suburban, and he said, "Take off your shirt." And I said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "Well, Chris, it's much more important to me that you don't just show your love for Jesus with your T-shirt, but you show it in the way that you treat your brother, your sister, your mom and dad." And so that's when I really discovered and was reminded about what it really means to love others. Isn't just through showing my faith on a T-shirt, but it was in how I treated them.
One time when I was at church in Auburn, the pastor was talking about heroes, and he was talking about what it meant to be a hero, and he asked us, do any of you want to come up and talk about who your hero is? And so I thought for a minute about, who is my greatest hero? I never thought about that before, and it didn't take me too long to realize that was my dad.
It was amazing to me, even with Steve's diagnosis, how positive he was through everything. Even if I was having a bad day, he would be the one to cheer me up instead of me trying to cheer him up.
Steve's circumstances were unfortunate, and the outlook was not great. He trusted God, and he knew that God was going to take care of him. It was evident that he knew that God held him in his hands, and whether it was going to be here on earth with us or up in heaven with Jesus.
And so I'm just so glad that Dad included us in everything that he did. And by doing that, he taught us how to work hard, or how to talk to a customer, or how to be really responsible.
It's because he always was there for us. And he was never afraid to tell us that he loved us, to be affectionate. So that was really important to him, that we knew that he loved us, and that he showed us that in many ways. And so
I just really appreciated how Steve responded to me, and he was always very uplifting, and he always tried to make positive from a negative situation. And I just really appreciated that about him, and that was just one of the things that really stuck out in my mind about Steve, was how encouraging he was to everyone.
Steve was the kind of person who never met a stranger, and he left this world an inspiration to all of us.
I think one time Dad and I were at the garden shop on a really busy spring day, and we were out in the display area, and we were working with different customers at the same time, and there was some kind of miscommunication. And so Dad decided, let's walk back to the break room and really talk this out, figure out what happened. And I said, well, Dad, what if the miscommunication was your fault? Why don't you, he was telling me to take responsibility. And I said, well, Dad, what if the miscommunication was your fault? Why don't you take responsibility? And Dad said, well, he just kind of paused. And he said, well, Chris, I take responsibility for everything you are. And I just thought, wow, he's my dad, and he loves me, and he's really showing me how to take responsibility and to really work hard. And so that's one thing that I love about my dad, and that I always remember is to whatever is going on in my life, to take responsibility for it and to really own up to it.
I think that that's one of the huge lessons from him that I'm going to take in raising my own children, making sure that they always know that I love them. So definitely it was very easy for me to get up and tell everybody at the church that my dad was my hero and why. And I'm so glad that I realized that, and so I could call him afterward and tell him, I realized today that you're my hero, and of course I still feel that way today.